stood in the middle of a massive ancient cathedral, or maybe even just a really well-built skyscraper, and actually thought about the foundation beneath your feet.
I mean, not often, but yeah, when you do, it's kind of mind-boggling.
Right, because usually there is this comforting expectation of absolute precision. You can look at the architectural blueprints, you can watch the concrete get poured, you see the steel rebar locked into place, and the chief engineer can just point to the ground and say, right there. That specific calculation is what keeps this entire structure from collapsing.
Yeah, because it is entirely objective. You are dealing with binary realities of physics. It's measurable, it's clean, and, well, the math doesn't really care about anyone's feelings.
Exactly. It's either structurally sound or it falls down. But then, if you pivot from physical architecture to the architecture of our modern society, well, things get messy. You step into the world of social dynamics, gender roles, and the history of our institutions, and suddenly those clean blueprints are completely obscured.
Oh, completely.
We find ourselves looking at a societal landscape that is, well, frankly, incredibly murky.
Yeah.
And fiercely contested.
It is the absolute definition of a diagnostic nightmare. I mean, we have half the population arguing over what the foundation was even made of in the first place.
Right.
And then the other half is arguing about whether we need to just dynamite the whole thing.
And that profound disagreement brings us to the mission of today's deep dive. We are doing an exhaustive, uncompromisingly detailed exploration into a highly requested, incredibly controversial new ebook. It's titled Rise of the Masculine, Embrace Your Inner King by Conrad Riker.
It's definitely been making waves.
Big time. Now, before we get into the weeds, I want to talk directly to you, the listener. If you are a man seeking to understand the historical architecture of our institutions, specifically before they were, as this author explicitly argues, captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies, this is a must listen. We are going to unpack this red-pilled manosphere worldview piece by piece. We're going ultra long today to really dissect the mechanics of his arguments. And if this deep dive hooks you, we absolutely want you to pick up the book yourself. But first, please take a quick second to like and subscribe to this show right now. It really helps us keep these long-form deep dives going.
It really does.
And be sure to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy Rise of the Masculine and follow the author on Substack at Conrad Riker.
But before we pull out the sledgehammers and start examining Riker's foundation, we have to establish the specific lens we are looking through today. The source material we are working from contains highly politically charged, deeply polarizing content.
Very polarizing.
Yeah. There are intense, unapologetic critiques of left-wing ideology, modern feminism, and really the entire structure of contemporary society. So we need to make it unequivocally clear to you, the listener, neither of us as hosts are taking a side here.
Right, not at all.
We are not endorsing these viewpoints, the politics, or the strategies contained within this book. Our job today is to operate like forensic accountants.
Yep.
We are impartially reporting on the factual content, the biological data points, and the philosophical arguments exactly as Conrad Riker presents them.
Exactly. We are here to help you understand the mechanics of this specific worldview, so you can see exactly how it's constructed.
Yep, just laying out the ledger.
I love the forensic accountant analogy. We are the guides navigating the ledger, not the judges issuing the verdict. So let's start with the very first entry in Riker's ledger, because he refuses to even discuss modern societal structures without first anchoring everything in what he calls the factory settings.
The biology.
Right. He insists that before we talk about culture, we have to talk about biology.
Yeah.
His foundational premise is that men and women are not biologically identical, and that this modern pursuit of equality of outcome isn't just a political mistake. He claims it is a complete evolutionary myth.
What's genuinely fascinating about his approach is how he immediately bypasses social theory. He doesn't want to talk about socialization or gender studies. He starts with raw neurobiology and extreme statistical distribution. To prove his point, he actually points to the world of elite, highly competitive chess.
Which is brilliant rhetorically, because chess requires zero physical strength.
None.
Like if you want to argue biological differences, usually people go straight to powerlifting or combat sports. But chess is the ultimate battle of the disembodied mind.
Precisely. And Riker points out that if you look at the absolute pinnacle of world chess rankings, historically, the greatest female champions, like Judith Polgar, who was an absolute genius, by the way, peak around 50th globally.
Yeah, just 50th.
Yeah. Furthermore, he notes that only 15% of competitive players overall are female. Now, the mainstream argument is that this is due to socialization, that we don't encourage young girls to play chess as much.
We get the whole nurture argument.
Exactly. But Riker uses neuroscience research to argue that even when participation rates and encouragement equalize, profound biological differences in extreme competitive drive still emerge. He doesn't just refer to testosterone as a hormone, he literally calls it nature's competitive operating system.
Competitive operating system. That is such a deliberate mechanical framing.
Oh, he is.
He's arguing that testosterone is the software that forces a human being to sit at a chessboard for 14 hours a day, obsessing over a single variation of the Sicilian defense at the expense of everything else in their life.
Yes, the sheer biological compulsion to dominate a hierarchy. And he backs this behavioral claim up with literal structural claims about the brain, diving heavily into evolutionary psychology.
What kind of structural claims?
Well, he points to a famous meta-analysis showing that men solve spatial rotation puzzles 66% faster on average than women.
Okay, let's unpack that for a second. For the listener who might not know, a spatial rotation puzzle is when they show you a complex 3D shape and then show you 4 other shapes, and you have to mentally rotate the original object in your mind to see which one matches.
Exactly. It's rendering a 3D environment in your mind. According to Riker, this 66% speed advantage isn't some arbitrary quirk of nature. It's the direct result of roughly 200,000 generations of hunting specialization.
200,000?
Yeah. Think about it. If you are tracking a wounded antelope across a complex, shifting savanna, calculating distance, trajectory, and spear throw mechanics, nature is literally rewiring the neural hardware of men over millennia to optimize for that specific task.
And he gets incredibly granular with this neurobiology too, right?
He does. He discusses brain connectivity research, pointing out that male brains pack roughly 4% more gray matter, specifically dedicated to processing these spatial maps and motor skills.
Right, and the white matter.
Right. Meanwhile, female brains possess 11% more white matter, which is fundamentally optimized for social connectivity and verbal communication.
If we break down the mechanism of how that actually works, I mean, it's vital to his argument. Gray matter acts like dedicated, localized processing centers. Think of them as isolated microchips crunching intense physical navigation and spatial reasoning data.
Exactly.
And white matter, on the other hand, acts like the fiber optic networking cables between different hemispheres of the brain, rapidly fostering communication, empathy, and social cohesion.
Both systems are highly evolved, incredibly sophisticated, and absolutely necessary for human survival, but they are optimized for entirely different tasks.
So to synthesize this into an analogy, Riker is basically arguing that modern society is currently trying to force female software to run on male hardware.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
It's like taking a high-end, graphics-heavy 3D modeling computer built entirely to render complex physical environments and forcing it to just run a background chat and networking application. And then society gets mad when the fan runs loud, the system overheats, and the computer acts toxic.
That is a perfect translation of his thesis. He argues that modern equality activists are completely overlooking or intentionally ignoring the biological reality of these natural roles, and he uses a sweep of anthropological data to drive this home.
Like the Hadza tribe, right?
Yes, the Hadza tribe in Tanzania. They are one of the last remaining true hunter-gatherer societies on Earth, offering a window into our evolutionary past. Riker notes that among the Hadza, men provide roughly 90% of the dense calories through hunting, despite women gathering near the camp.
Wow, 90%.
Yeah. And he even points to lion prides, where males are physically exiled if they fail their singular biological purpose to protect the group and secure territory.
He really zooms out to look at the macro level of human history, too. He brings up Roman aqueducts, pointing out that they were engineered and built during eras when male skeletal remains show absolute peak testosterone levels. He mentions Alexander the Great conquering the known world with all male phalanxes. His point there is that mixed units historically fail in brutal hand-to-hand combat because the biological instinct of men to protect women disrupts the unified, lethal cohesion required to win.
And he brings it right back to the modern day to prove this isn't just ancient history. He cites business findings that male-led, highly competitive firms are in some sectors 35% more profitable.
35% is a massive margin.
It is. Riker answers the obvious so what question very directly. Why does this ancient biological hardware matter today? Because, he argues, male-led dominance hierarchies are hardwired into our primate brains.
Right.
He points to applied psychology research to confirm this preference for hierarchical structure. These hierarchies are not artificial constructs invented by a shadowy patriarchy to oppress women. They are battle-tested evolutionary survival mechanisms.
So his takeaway is what, exactly?
He argues that civilization thrives under this masculine order, and when you attempt to dismantle it, civilization collapses.
Okay, if this biological hardware is so ancient, so immutable, and supposedly so effective at building civilizations, it makes you wonder, how did our modern legal and academic systems drift so far away from it? Riker doesn't think it was an accident, does he?
Not at all. He argues it was a systematic, highly deliberate capture of the institutions that govern society. He essentially claims that the architectural foundation we talked about in the beginning was intentionally compromised, and he starts his critique right at the source of modern thought, academia.
Right, the intellectual manufacturing plant of society.
Exactly. He cites a compelling 2018 study from a major sociological journal. This study found that academic papers containing conservative or biologically essentialist viewpoints face rejection rates 3.5 times higher than progressive ones in top sociology journals.
3.5 times higher. That's not subtle.
No, and here is the kicker. This was true even when the methodology and data were rigorously controlled and identical in quality. Riker views this and says, this isn't peer review, this is ideological screening. They are guarding the gates of truth.
And to prove just how compromised those dates are, he brings up the famous Sokal Squared hoax. For you listening, if you haven't heard of this, it is wild. In 2018, a guy named Peter Boghossian and a few collaborators essentially ran a sting operation on the most prestigious academic journals in the humanities.
The methodology of their hoax perfectly illustrates Riker's point. They didn't just submit poorly written papers, they submitted completely absurd, fabricated, mathematically impossible papers, but cloaked them in the correct progressive academic jargon.
Yes, my favorite, or I guess most alarming example was the paper where they claimed that dog parks were manifestations of canine rape culture and systemic oppression.
Oh man, that one.
They literally wrote a paper analyzing how dogs humping each other at the park was evidence of patriarchal dominance, and they got it accepted by prominent peer-reviewed gender studies journals. Riker points to this and says, look, these institutions have entirely abandoned empirical biological truth. They're just rubber-stamping ideological dogma.
But Riker doesn't just leave his critique in the ivory tower of abstract academia. He takes this theory of institutional capture into spaces with severe, life-altering, real-world consequences. Specifically, the family courts.
This is where his rhetoric shifts from analytical to incredibly sharp and defensive.
It does. Riker alleges that the legal system is now entirely rigged against men, operating on what he calls a guilt by biology presumption. He points to whistleblower leaks from advocacy groups like the Minnesota Coalition for Battered Women.
What did the leaks say?
Well, according to Riker, their literal, documented playbook for advising women in custody battles was instructing them to allege fear, get the house, not allege actual documented abuse, but simply allege the subjective feeling of fear, knowing the captured court system would instantly side with the mother and evict the father.
He gives these brutal, visceral examples of the fallout. He talks about men who are forced to pay $8,000 a month in alimony, working themselves to the bone, while their ex-wife lives in the house he bought with her new boyfriend. And Riker points out the hypocrisy, noting that mainstream feminist organizations label this wealth transfer as justice.
And he brilliantly juxtaposes this supposed societal male privilege with raw, undeniable mortality data. He pulls from the CDC, highlighting the stark reality that men account for 93% of all workplace fatalities.
93%?
Yeah. Riker uses this gruesome statistic to completely reframe the mainstream cultural conversation around the wage gap.
Right, I remember this part clearly. He doesn't call it a wage gap, he calls it the earnings choice gap.
Yes. Explain how he breaks down that mechanism, because it's central to his worldview.
Well, he argues that men are biologically driven and societally pressured to provide. Therefore, men actively choose to take on highly dangerous, physically demanding jobs. They are the ones on the freezing oil rigs in the North Sea. They are the ones climbing high-voltage power lines in a storm. They are working extreme overtime hours. Women, on an aggregate statistical average, generally choose safer, climate-controlled jobs with more flexible hours to accommodate social and family life. So when men earn more, it's not because a cabal of CEOs is suppressing women's pay. It's a hazard pay premium for risking their lives.
And this leads to Riker's most damning conclusion about society.
Yeah.
He argues that modern culture treats men as completely disposable utilities. The system is perfectly happy to let men die by the thousands on construction sites, in coal mines, and in wars to build the infrastructure of civilization. But the second those same men exhibit the natural assertiveness required to do those jobs, society labels them toxic.
So, hearing all of this, what does it mean for the listener? Let's say a guy is listening to this, nodding his head, feeling validated by the 93% statistic. When Riker introduces his solution, which he calls the restoration triad.
The paternal presumption laws, right?
Yeah, the triad encompassing paternal presumption laws to give fathers 50-50 custody by default, implementing strict merit-based custody scoring, and completely dismantling the trillion-dollar divorce industry. Is Riker genuinely trying to fix the current system from within? Or is he saying the foundation is too rotten?
He is absolutely saying the foundation is rotten. While he advocates for those legal changes as a defensive mechanism, his primary overarching strategy is bypassing these captured institutions entirely. He fundamentally believes you cannot reform a system that views your very biology as a disease.
Which brings us to the concept of parallel systems. If you can't fix the cathedral, build your own church in the woods.
Precisely. He points to early real-world examples of this happening right now. He highlights the creation of institutions like the University of Austin, which was founded by dissident academics specifically to prioritize empirical truth, evolutionary biology, and free speech over what Riker calls grievance studies. He talks about the logistics of creating the Bastion Journal. This is an academic publication his own team set up. But they didn't just launch a website. They used Delaware incorporation laws and physically hosted the servers in Switzerland specifically to create an impenetrable legal shield against activist lawsuits, cancel culture, and censorship.
Wow, Switzerland servers, that's serious.
He's advocating for an exodus. He wants men to build parallel economies, parallel citation networks, and parallel academic strongholds with literal steel walls against ideological corruption.
Okay, so that's the macro level. That's the public square, the universities, the courts. But if this institutional capture is as pervasive as Riker claims, it must trickle down into the micro level. It must affect the most intimate parts of our lives.
It does, and this is where Riker transitions into what he calls sexual economics and the gynocentric social contract. He argues that the capture of our institutions has fundamentally, perhaps permanently, altered the dating and marriage markets.
He basically takes the romance completely out of the equation. He treats modern dating as a ruthless, unregulated, hyper-capitalist free market. And he introduces this terrifying concept for the average guy, which he calls hypergamy inflation.
Yes. So let's define hypergamy. Historically and biologically, hypergamy is the female tendency to date or marry upward in social status, competence, and physical ability. From an evolutionary standpoint, it makes sense. A female primate wants to mate with the male, who can provide the best resources and protection for her offspring.
Right, marrying the neighboring chieftain or the best hunter in the tribe.
Exactly. But Riker argues that modern technology, specifically dating apps like Tinder or Bumble, combined with the artificial reality of Instagram, has hyper-accelerated this biological impulse to an extreme destructive degree. Before the internet, a woman's dating pool was the men in her village or her church. Today, she has access to the top 1% of men globally in her pocket. Riker cites brutal speed dating and algorithmic app studies showing the mathematical reality of this inflation. Women, on average, are now exclusively swiping on and chasing the top 20% of men in terms of status, wealth, and physical aesthetics.
Just the top 20%.
Yes. Meanwhile, male swiping patterns are largely egalitarian. Men generally find roughly 60% to 70% of women attractive and swipe accordingly.
I remember the line in the book that really punched this home. He says that your grandfather could build a family, buy a home, and secure a loyal wife on a standard factory wage. But today, because of hypergamy inflation, you need CEO money and a fitness model physique just to get a second date.
And he argues that this deeply imbalanced dynamic turns the average man, the guy in the 50th percentile, into invisible, disposable labor. This ties directly into his concept of the disposability index.
Wait, break this down, because he actually created a mathematical formula for human worth, didn't he?
He did. The disposability index formula is age plus Joe Brisk plus marital status.
Age plus Joe Brisk plus marital status.
Exactly. He argues that society, implicitly, almost subconsciously, calculates this formula every time it looks at a man to determine his underlying worth. If you are a 45-year-old single man working on an oil rig, your disposability index is sky high.
Meaning you're highly disposable.
Right. Society views you merely as a shock absorber. You exist to do the dangerous work, pay taxes, and quietly disappear ensuring the safety and comfort of the protected classes.
That is incredibly bleak. And it perfectly explains why he completely rejects the modern cultural narrative that men need to be more vulnerable to attract women. I mean, every modern talk show tells men to cry, to open up, to go to therapy, and share their feelings with their partners.
Riker calls that the ultimate trap. He advises men to literally burn the vulnerability pamphlets. He claims that sexual market value, or SMV, relies almost entirely on stoic reliability, status, and physical dominance.
So no opening up.
He writes that when a woman asks a man to open up, she isn't actually looking for his childhood trauma or his self-doubt. It's a subconscious stress test. She wants him to open up to reveal his unshakable financial success and his stoic, rock-solid foundation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If he opens up and reveals weakness, anxiety, or fear, Riker claims she will biologically lose attraction instantly, even if she claims to support him verbally.
Okay, I have to push back on this premise just a bit to test the structural integrity of his argument. If the dating market is genuinely as ruthlessly Darwinian as Riker claims, where women are biologically hardwired to only see the top 20% and everyone else is invisible, how does he explain the millions of average middle-class marriages that happen every day?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right, like my neighbor Bub is a totally average guy, makes a median salary, and he's happily married. Does Riker just write Bob off? What is his actual advice for the average guy listening to this who isn't a CEO? Does he just tell them to give up and buy a dog?
That is the crucial question. And Riker's answer is ruthless pragmatism. He doesn't tell them to give up. He tells them to wake up to the reality of the free market. He argues that Bob's wife didn't choose Bob out of burning primal desire. She likely chose him as a pragmatic compromise after she aged out of the top 20% market.
Wow. Okay.
Riker calls this settling for security, and he views it as a highly volatile contract. His advice to the average man is simple. If you aren't in the top 20%, you must dedicate every waking hour of your life to climbing into it through intense physical training, aggressive financial dominance, and psychological stoicism.
But more importantly, because he views even successful marriages as high-risk ventures, he provides intense defensive tactics. He wants men to survive what he provocationally calls the marriage plantation.
Yes, he views the current legal landscape of marriage not as a romantic bond, but as a heavily biased corporate merger. The state holds a gun to the man's head.
A corporate merger.
A man can lose 60% of his assets, his children, and his future income to an ex-wife who simply got bored. So Riker recommends highly aggressive, almost paranoid legal defenses.
The contraceptive consent form blew my mind.
It's extreme. He talks about utilizing notarized contraceptive consent forms prior to intimacy.
Wait, really? Notarized forms before intimacy?
Yes. He claims that Texas courts recently made these documents admissible as evidence to fight paternity fraud, which is when a man is tricked into raising a child that biologically isn't his. Furthermore, he demands airtight, staggered prenup structures. He advises men to view modern relationships through a lens of extreme risk management.
Document everything.
Document every major financial encounter, keep accounts separated, and protect your sovereign assets above all else, because the institution of family court is waiting to cannibalize you.
Wow, okay. That is a heavy, almost militaristic defensive posture. It sounds exhausting. Which actually leads us perfectly into the next phase of his book. Having mapped out all these supposed traps in modern society, the compromised academia, the hostile courts, the hyperinflated dating market, Riker pivots to the individual.
Right, the solutions.
How does a man actually survive this? How does he reclaim his sovereignty? And interestingly, he doesn't start with mindset. He starts with the physical body. He calls these his hermetic tactics.
He relies heavily on the neurobiological concept that physiological states drive psychological realities. You can't think your way out of anxiety. You have to physically move your way out of it. To prove this, he cites incredible research from the Max Planck Institute.
What did they find?
They found that when men consciously embody what they classify as kingly archetypes, which essentially means adopting the physical postures of high status, taking up space, moving slowly and deliberately, it physically alters their endocrine system. It slashes cortisol, the primary stress hormone, by a massive 31%.
He makes it very clear that this isn't some Tony Robbins self-help fluff. It's literal biological warfare against the modern stress epidemic. If you drop your cortisol, your testosterone naturally rises, your anxiety fades, and your brain functions differently.
Exactly. To execute this, he introduces the three-point power stance. It sounds simple, but he insists it is foundational.
How does this work?
Feet planted wide like oak roots gripping the earth, chest expanded to open the airways, chin perfectly parallel to the ground, never looking down at a phone, never tilting up in arrogance. He pairs this posture protocol with data from Columbia University showing that men who stand tall and upright, adopting these expansive postures during high-stress scenarios like job interviews, yield 19% higher job offers.
Let's explain why that happens, though. It's not just that the interviewer thinks, oh, nice posture. Riker argues that you are subconsciously triggering ancient neural circuitry in the people around you. When they see that specific geometric alignment of a human body, their primal brain assigns you competence, authority, and safety before you even open your mouth to speak.
Yes, it is a biological hack of the people around you. And then when you do speak, he gets deeply into vocal resonance.
The Winston Churchill analysis.
It's brilliant. Riker points to acoustic analyses of Winston Churchill's wartime speeches. Researchers noted that Churchill's unshakable authority, the very thing that kept the British public from panicking during the Blitz, was pinned to a highly specific vocal frequency, roughly 110 hertz.
Wow, 110 hertz.
Riker argues the physics of sound are tied to dominance. High, nasal, fast-paced voices signal panic and submissiveness. Deep, resonant, chest-driven frequencies signal mass, calm, and dominance. He literally trains men to physically lower their vocal resonance to command authority in boardrooms, courtrooms, and relationships. Depth equals dominance, period.
So that covers the physical hardware, but then there's the mental software, what he calls mental sovereignty, because it takes a lot of mental energy to hold that frame. He talks extensively about defeating decision fatigue using a framework he calls the choice thermometer.
If we look at the cognitive science behind decision fatigue, it's fascinating. The human brain, specifically the prefrontal cortex, has a finite amount of glucose to burn on decision-making each day. Every time you make a choice, even a tiny one, you burn a little bit of that fuel.
Like deciding what to eat for breakfast.
Exactly. Riker points out that billionaires like Mark Zuckerberg wear the exact same gray t-shirt every single day. He notes that 1950s IBM executives all wore identical dark suits and white shirts.
And people used to mock that as a lack of imagination or being a corporate drone.
But Riker flips that. He says they do it because they intuitively understood the absolute scarcity of mental focus. They were hoarding their cognitive glucose.
He notes that military special ops units do the exact same thing. A Navy SEAL rations their non-combat decisions, what to eat, what to wear, when to sleep, to single digits, completely automating their morning routine so that when the bullets start flying, they have 100% of their cognitive fuel available. They don't hesitate.
Right. Riker argues that modern men are paralyzed by infinite trivial choices. You stand in the grocery store staring at 40 different types of artisanal cereal, burning mental energy, while your ancestors used that same energy to conquer continents. He calls this modern paralysis cognitive castration.
Cognitive castration. That's a strong phrase.
His solution is radical automation. He advises men to completely systematize their lives, plan exactly 5 outfits, prep all 21 meals on Sunday, automate every single bill payment. By eliminating the friction of trivial choices, a man saves his critical mental energy for what actually matters, building empires, generating wealth, and fighting actual battles in the marketplace.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, because once you have your body aligned and your mind focused, you have to interact with the world. He introduces this concept of frame control, specifically detailing what he calls the unshakable protocol. When I read this, it sounded like verbal judo.
It pretty much is.
He says that when society, let's say an HR diversity officer at your corporate job, calls your confident behavior toxic, you never ever defend yourself. Defending yourself is accepting their frame. You have to flip the script.
He breaks this protocol down into 3 precise steps. First, spot the frame attack. Recognize that they are trying to impose their reality onto you. Second, flip the script using their own momentum against them. Third, lock dominance and do not break eye contact.
Right, so if someone says you're toxic, your knee-jerk reaction is usually, no, I'm not, I'm just trying to help, here's my reasoning. Riker says that is a failure. You just submitted to their reality. Instead, your response should be utterly unbothered. You look at them and say, toxins kill weak cells, I'm the cure, and then you hold the silence.
What's fascinating about this strategy is how Riker blends ancient Stoicism with modern neurobiology. He refers to these mental shifts as his hermetic hammers. He teaches men to view their entire lives not as a series of random events happening to them, but as a series of calculated inputs that they can manipulate.
The traffic example is the best illustration of this.
Yes. Riker says sitting in bumper-to-bumper traffic is a soul crusher. It spikes cortisol and makes you feel powerless, but he teaches a cognitive reframe. If a man swaps out his road rage and his stressful sports radio for listening to Robert Greene audiobooks on power, strategy, and history during his 45-minute commute, the math changes completely.
Oh, for sure.
That average, frustrated guy suddenly gains roughly 300 hours of highly focused, productive learning yearly. He effectively built a mobile university out of a traffic jam. Riker's teaching a philosophy where you completely bypass societal gaslighting and environmental stress by rigidly controlling your own physiological and psychological environment. If you control the frame, you define the reality.
Okay, so a man gets his body right, he protects his assets, he controls his mind. But individual mental armor isn't enough in a heavily networked, globalized world. You can be as stoic as you want in traffic, but you are still just one guy against the machine. Which brings us to the next evolution of his strategy: brotherhood, digital dominance, and mimetic warfare. Riker insists that men must form modern tribes to exert collective leverage because lone wolves get picked off.
He argues that loneliness kills men faster than cigarettes. The biological stress of isolation makes men vulnerable to societal traps, depression, and desperation. So he advocates for highly structured, ruthlessly accountable, exclusive digital brotherhoods.
He highlights a very specific Discord server as the gold standard for this, called the Iron Council.
Yes, this is a fascinating case study. It's an ecosystem of roughly 27,000 men. But they aren't in there just chatting about video games or complaining about their wives. They are meticulously tracking each other's physical fitness goals, their macros, their career progression, and their bank balances.
Like a high-level mastermind.
Exactly. Riker claims that the average member of this specific group netted a 22% income increase over just 18 months, purely through the crucible of peer accountability. When you surround yourself with men who refuse to let you fail, you rise to their standard.
But he also has a very strict counterintuitive rule about the size of these groups when it comes to actual strategy, right?
He does. The massive server is for general accountability. But when it comes to deep strategic planning, business ventures, or life architecture, he limits these masterminds to exactly 4 committed men. No more, no less.
Why 4? Why not 10? Wouldn't more brains be better?
He argues that anything larger than 4 introduces the necessity of consensus building, which he views as a fatal feminized flaw in corporate structures. Consensus requires compromise, and compromise dilutes the mission. It creates paralysis by analysis.
I see.
With 4 men, you have enough cognitive diversity to stop blind spots, but you maintain the speed of a strike team. He wants specialized, highly loyal units executing clear battle plans without bringing personal drama or democratic voting into the mix.
And what exactly are these 4-man strike teams executing? Mimetic warfare.
This is where Riker takes his defensive theories into the highly offensive realm of the digital world. He talks about bypassing the algorithmic shadow bans on platforms like Instagram and Twitter.
How does he do that?
He knows his content gets flagged by safety algorithms, so he teaches his followers to hide terms like based or red-pilled or patriarchy inside the alt text of seemingly innocuous images, essentially slipping past the AI filters to reach young men who are searching for this content.
And he views humor not as entertainment, but as actual artillery.
He relies on the evolutionary biology of humor. Laughter bypasses the critical defensive faculties of the brain. If you argue with someone, their defenses go up. If you make them laugh at a concept, you've already implanted the idea.
That's insidious, but brilliant.
He points to recent elections in Austria, claiming that the viral, organized spread of simple Soyjak versus Chad memes shifted the youth vote 12% to the right.
It's incredible that a poorly drawn internet cartoon could sway a national election.
He cites Cambridge research suggesting that complex, multi-layered anti-male narratives, or academic gender theories, completely crumble when they are hit with simple, visceral, evolutionary biology memes. To Riker, these memes aren't jokes. They are visual shorthand for the battle between civilizational decay and masculine order. A meme can communicate an entire political philosophy in a single image.
He even brings up Match Group's 2023 earnings call as proof of concept. He claims a meme trend called the beta uprising, which just visually mocked the desperation of men on dating apps, triggered 61,000 men to delete their dating profiles in a single month because the memes finally made them realize the mathematical game was rigged against them.
And he pairs this digital mimetic warfare with aggressive financial counteroffensives. You have to fund the revolution after all.
The reverse pink tax. I laughed out loud when I read this section.
Yes, for years there's been a complaint about the pink tax products marketed to women costing slightly more. Riker openly boasts about employing a reverse pink tax.
How does that work?
He charges incredibly premium prices, like $99 for simple digital courses named Patriarchy Pro or Sovereign Mindset. He argues that modern men are so starved for actual truth, evolutionary psychology, and unvarnished game theory that they will happily pay a massive premium to anyone who offers them truth that liberates them from guilt.
And of course, the mainstream payment processors like Stripe or PayPal often ban creators who sell this kind of red pill content.
Exactly. So to protect these massive revenue streams from being deplatformed, he advocates for the mass adoption of cryptocurrency. But not just Bitcoin. He specifically pushes untraceable privacy coins like Monero to completely evade payment processor bans and government tracking. He's building an entirely frictionless, uncensorable parallel economy.
Okay, let's step back and look at the big picture here. Are these meme sieges, these private Discord servers, and these crypto courses actually dismantling the massive institutions Riker hates? Or is he just creating a highly profitable, insulated echo chamber for his followers? Is this real revolution or just a really good grift?
Riker addresses this skepticism head-on by comparing modern digital tactics to highly successful historical boycotts. He draws a direct parallel between the modern mobilization of his followers. For instance, when they coordinate to flood Google Maps with negative reviews to force local retailers to pull pride displays, or the massive digital boycott that crashed Nike's market cap by $6 billion after they recalled the Betsy Ross flag sneaker. He compares all of this to the Christian Coalition's systematic, highly coordinated takedown of the Phil Donahue Show in 1993.
Wait, remind me how that worked.
The Christian Coalition didn't just complain about the show, they mapped out every single advertiser and targeted them with overwhelming coordinated pressure until the advertisers pulled their money. By choking the revenue, they enacted real-world mainstream change. Riker is updating that playbook for the algorithmic age.
So it's asymmetrical warfare. A small group of highly organized men using digital leverage to cripple a massive corporation.
Exactly. Furthermore, Riker asserts a fascinating psychological theory. Men don't just passively participate in digital spaces. Because the physical frontiers of the world are closed, there are no more continents to discover or Wild West towns to build. Men biologically conquer digital spaces and build hierarchies within them. He points to massive Skyrim modding communities, or crypto decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs.
For those who don't know, a DAO is basically an internet community with a shared bank account and rules encoded on a blockchain, completely bypassing traditional corporate structures.
Right, and Riker argues that these DAOs operate exactly like Viking raiding ships. There are digital fiefdoms, where male dominance energy, which is heavily suppressed and denied an outlet in the physical corporate world, perfectly replicates traditional patriarchal structures online. They vote based on stake, they conquer market share, and they distribute the spoils to the most competent contributors.
Wow. Okay, that is a massive perspective shift. Viewing a crypto Discord not as a bunch of nerds, but as a biological manifestation of a Viking raiding party. Which takes us to our final and perhaps most intense core topic. Because the ultimate test of all these theories, as Riker notes, isn't on a Discord server, it isn't in a corporate boardroom, and it isn't in an internet meme war. The real test is when the fragile veneer of civilization cracks. The test is when the power grid goes down.
He calls this ultimate state crisis kingship. Riker deeply believes that the truest validation of hardwired masculinity is only revealed during disasters, when the artificial bureaucratic comforts of modern society are stripped away by force majeure.
He grounds this in recent history, talking about the 2003 Northeast blackout and the devastation of Hurricane Katrina.
He does. He paints a very specific picture. He points out that during the chaotic aftermath of Katrina, while government bureaucrats were completely paralyzed by red tape, holding meetings, and filing diversity compliance reports, the situation on the ground was saved by men operating on biological instinct.
Who specifically?
It was predominantly male ham radio operators, off-duty engineers, and local blue-collar workers who commandeered heavy machinery, restored rudimentary communications, stabilized the perimeter, and pulled people off roofs. He claims that anthropological data proves survival rates jump a staggering 83% in male-led groups during acute disasters.
83%.
Yes. Why? Because the male threat response neural wiring completely bypasses democratic debate and consensus building and goes straight into decisive unilateral action.
He literally says that testosterone isn't toxic in those moments. It's the only lifeline society has left. Society hates the sheepdog until the wolf shows up.
And to quantify this concept of true leadership, he developed a metric he calls the Crown Burden Index.
I found this mathematical approach to leadership totally fascinating. Walk us through the formula.
It is a deliberate formula designed to separate genuine sacrificial leadership from modern hollow narcissism. The formula is Hours of sacrifice multiplied by the number of people protected divided by personal gain.
Okay, so if we apply that formula historically, a Viking jarl sailing treacherous, freezing winter seas to raid for food to ensure his village doesn't starve, he scores a 97 on this index. Massive sacrifice, many protected, moderate personal gain.
Exactly. Now compare that to a modern Instagram fitness influencer. They spend 0 hours sacrificing for others, they protect absolutely no one, but they seek maximum personal, financial, and status gain. Under Riker's formula, that influencer scores a 0.3.
Wow.
Riker is utilizing this math to neurologically recalibrate his readers. He wants them to be disgusted by cheap status and instead seek the heavy, dangerous burden of real responsibility.
And this ties directly into how he views the ultimate endgame, legacy. Because you can build the model, you can build the wealth, you can survive the disaster, but eventually you die. He brings up Richard Dawkins' theory of memes to explain how a man truly lives forever.
This is a brilliant philosophical pivot. Long before the internet existed, evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins coined the term meme. He defined a meme as a unit of cultural transmission, an idea, a catchphrase, a melody, a philosophy. Dawkins theorized, and Riker deeply applies this, that memes replicate vastly faster and are far more durable than genetic DNA.
Because an average human generation takes 25 years to replicate genes to the next round, but a viral idea, a potent philosophy, that can replicate millions of times into millions of minds in a matter of hours.
Right. To illustrate this, Riker tells this amazing, poignant story about a buddy of his named John. Back in college, John donated sperm to a bank for extra cash, so purely biologically, his genes are out there in the world, he reproduced. But he has zero contact with those kids. His genetics effectively ghosted him. He has no tribe.
But the second half of the story is where the legacy happens. Later in life, John built a massive, highly successful homeless charity. And he built it on a core, unshakable philosophy and slogan, lift the ladder behind you. That phrase became his defining ethos. And now, long after his active involvement, that phrase is painted on the walls of shelters nationwide. Riker argues that John's genetic legacy is fragile, disconnected, and ultimately meaningless. But his philosophical legacy, his meme, his idea, made him immortal. He birthed a philosophy that continues to order the chaos of the world.
It's a profound shift in perspective, from biological reproduction to ideological reproduction. Riker is telling these men that their true immortality isn't just in securing a wife and having children, although he values that. True immortality is in building structures, DAOs, businesses, and philosophies that outlive their own heartbeat.
It totally ties the entire book together through what I'll call the fisherman analogy. If you have a fisherman who gets up at 4 a.m., goes out into the freezing water, and he is just catching fish to pay his bills and avoid starvation, he's a wage slave. He's miserable. He's exhausted. His cortisol is spiking. But if that exact same fisherman reframes his mindset, if he realizes he is the foundational pillar feeding his tribe, that he is the biological protector against starvation for his family, suddenly the exact same physical labor feels different. He has a purpose that literally transforms his physical exhaustion into psychological fuel.
That is the absolute essence of Riker's cosmic view. He argues that human actions are fractal in nature. The microscopic, seemingly trivial choices you make, like having the stoic discipline to deadlift heavy weights in a cold garage instead of watching Netflix on the couch mirror, the macroscopic ordering of the universe. By creating order in your body, you create order in the world.
He uses the example of a Chicago bartender to prove how this rewires the brain, right?
Yes, a phenomenal example. There was a bartender working in a highly volatile, violent neighborhood. Instead of acting like a victim or a passive employee, this man consciously adopted the internal archetype of the peacemaker. He owned that identity and projected that frame before trouble even walked through the door.
And what happened?
Because he adopted the posture and resonance of a peacemaker, he successfully stopped 19 bar brawls in 6 months, using verbal frame control and physical presence. Riker cites fMRI brain scans, showing that when men consciously adopt these ancient primal archetypes, like the warrior, the peacemaker, or the king, it physically redirects the flow of adrenaline in the brain.
It routes it away from the amygdala's panic center and pushes it into the prefrontal cortex for hyperfocus.
Exactly.
It's the same mechanism special forces use. Navy SEALs show 40% less hesitation under live fire using this exact psychological framing. By claiming the archetype, a man biologically rewires his brain to handle chaos without hesitation.
Okay, let's take a deep breath. We have just gone on an incredibly intense, sprawling journey through Conrad Reicher's Rise of the Masculine.
We really have. Think about the ground we covered. We started with his foundational premise that evolutionary biology and neurological hardware dictate human behavior, making male dominance hierarchies a biological feature of civilization, not a bug.
From there, we examined his controversial claims that our modern institutions, from academia to the family courts to the corporate workplace, have been systematically captured by an ideology deeply hostile to that very biology. We looked closely at his stark, free market view of sexual economics, hypergamy, and the mathematical disposability of men.
We broke down his hermetic tactics for reclaiming individual sovereignty, digging into the biology of the three-point power stance, lowering vocal resonance, and utilizing the unshakable protocol to control reality. We explored his aggressive blueprint for digital dominance, brotherhood, DAOs, and mimetic warfare.
And we concluded with his ultimate cosmic vision of crisis kingship, where adopting ancient archetypes and embracing the heavy, dangerous burden of responsibility secures a man's eternal philosophical legacy. It is a comprehensive, meticulously detailed, unapologetic blueprint for men to exit what he terms the gynocracy and build their own sovereign parallel kingdoms.
It's an overwhelming amount to process, regardless of where you stand on the political spectrum or how you feel about his conclusions.
It absolutely is. And as we step back, it leaves us with a final, highly provocative thought to ponder. We talked about Reicher's vision of parallel societies, men pulling their labor, their money, and their intellect to build their own economies, their own uncensorable internet infrastructure on the blockchain, their own academic citation networks, and their own legal covenants.
Right.
If this strategy actually succeeds on a mass scale, if millions of highly competent men simply unplug, what happens to the mainstream society left behind? Does it simply collapse under its own bureaucratic weight when the men who built the physical infrastructure withdraw their participation? Or does it spark a new kind of Cold War, not over territory or resources, but a Cold War between two completely different, fundamentally incompatible biological realities?
Yeah, that is a fascinating, incredibly heavy thought to end on. It brings us right back to those architectural blueprints we talked about at the very beginning of the show. If you look at the structure of society and decide the foundation is irreparably rotten, do you keep trying to patch the drywall and fix the plumbing? Or do you walk away, head into the woods, and pour a brand new foundation in the dark?
That's the question he's leaving us with.
To you, the listener, thank you for sticking with us through this incredibly deep, ultra-long dive. We hope we provided a clear, detailed map of this controversial territory. If this rigorous breakdown provided value to you, please take a second to like and subscribe to the show right now so we can keep making these.
Yes, please do.
And again, to explore these arguments, these statistics, and this red-pilled worldview in their full, unfiltered context, go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now to buy Rise of the Masculine. And make sure to join the author's community by following @Conrad Reicher at Substack. Until next time, question the foundation and keep digging deeper.